So this is the third part in our series on internal Wing Chun Exposed. People have been asking questions, and I said I'll keep the series going as long as people have questions. So a question came in to me last night about structure, because we talk about structure a lot, and some people talk about structure, some people say there's no structure. Really, they're both incorrect, right? Because structure is something that you have to have. You have to have a structure, but there's different types of structure. If you have a static structure, that's obviously just a position, right? A position is not really a proper structure. When we look at structure, we look at it in terms of like a suspension bridge. You'll have the physical parts of the structure, which are the mechanics, the biomechanics, and then you have the variation. Like, so if you have tension cables in a bridge, that allows the adjustment, right? So when we look at, say, in Wing Chun, we're a snake and crane system, and people ask what's the difference between snake and crane. Crane is more the positioning, right? So if you have the positioning of the structure, that's the framing of the structure, right? And the snake is more the articulation of the structure. There's not two separate things. This is like internal, external. There's no separate things. You don't have one is snake, one is crane. You have that just from principal position. So if I have, for example, if I have a tan sa and a bong sa, quan sa, right? This is like you say, this looks like the crane, right? This is the crane positioning, right? The crane structure. Right? That's correct, that's the crane structure. But as soon as he starts to press me, I start to sink and control him. This is the snake, right? So the crane and the snake are combined. You're mixing them together. They're not separate. So again, we go back to that thing about internal, external. There's only hidden skill, obvious skill. The crane is very obvious. You can see the position, right? He moves. The snake is not very obvious because it's very hard to see where the pressure is coming from. If I'm in here, right, the crane, the position is very obvious. He pushes towards me, yeah, and when I'm sinking and I start to guide him, or I start to expand, right, it's very hard for you to see where the pressure is coming from. That's the snake energy, right? So the difference between snake and crane is really different mentality or your intention of what you're doing. There's not a difference in terms of one's internal, one's external, really. It's just one's obvious and one's not obvious, right? You can still have a position, a structural position that looks like it's not very obvious, right? Where who's got control, we have an equal position. But when he pushes towards me, I float him, he didn't float me. So it's not obvious why that happened. But we know why that happened because I sunk before he did, and I expanded and found his center, right? So snake and crane, having them separate doesn't make sense. That's for beginners, right? You think about, one is the structural mechanics, one is the internal mechanics. In the end, they become the same thing. We teach you that way sometimes because you need to understand how to do things, right? So when people say there's no such thing as structure, that to me is a bit foolish because, well, you have to do something, right? So everything is a structure, right? And people say there's no structure, there's frames. That's also foolish because a frame is a structure. So in Tai Chi, they call it a frame, right? So people have large frame, small frame. Actually, in fact, my Tai teachers told me there is no frames, right? The frames are based upon people's body mechanics and size. It's all to do with different teachers, right? So you can argue that point if you like. But so a frame and a structure is the same thing, really, right? It's the same. You're arguing semantics, right? They're the same thing. The difference is what you do with them, right? Because a frame that you don't know what you're doing with it isn't any good. A structure you don't know what you're doing with it isn't any good. So if you're doing Wing Chun, for example, is the tan sa here? Is it here? Is it here? It doesn't matter. It only matters to your system, whatever system you practice. So in your system, if it's up here, as long as you know why and how you use it, that's your frame, that's your structure. If it's here, that's your structure. If it's here, that's your structure, right? For us, we put our structure in line with body mechanics. So we look for the vector that goes to the hip, that goes through the ground, so we get that body mechanics. Some people say you don't need body mechanics or body mechanics is a low level. That's nonsense because every sport in the world requires body mechanics. No one just turns up to a track and field and just says, I'm just going to just run sideways and it's going to be fine. Everybody runs the same sort of way, right, to get body power, right? And anybody that does anything different is either really, really good or really, really bad, right? So from here, when I push towards him, he has to have a control of the structure. If he doesn't have that, there's nothing he can do, right? If his structure is completely passive, it's going to collapse. He'll have no structure. If he's stiff, then when I push him, he's going to fall off balance, which is what you see with a lot of demonstrations, right? People demonstrate reasonable good skills or very good skills against people that are not very good. And if they're not very good, if they're stiff, as soon as he's stiff, as soon as I touch him, he's going to go off balance, right? That's basic for people that are not very good. If I push him, he's going to start to link the elbow a little bit or load the pressure. Now I can't push him. Then I have to do something else to try to guide him off balance and find different ways to find his center. That's the real fight. The real fight is two skilled people trying to find their center or find the line of attack. Right? It's not about getting stooges to stand there, you be stiff as you can, and you push them and they're off balance, right? Or, even if I do it with higher skill, where I sink and then I expand, it looks even more impressive, right? But it's because he's stiff. If he's not stiff, when I do that, when I expand, he delinks. He can offset it, right? That's the whole point of skill. Now that's why in Chun, what we try to do when we're rolling is we strike someone because we want to make them a little bit tense. Once they're tense, then we can find their center. Once we strike them and they lose their center, their control, their yi's affected, then we can find their balance. So often when you see Chi Sao, we're often doing Chi Sao, we're battling through trying to find strikes. And at one point you'll find their balance and then you can start to take their balance and start to control them. And then they find it back again, right? So you have this ebb and flow. If you don't train live and train in that environment, you can't really do it for real, right? You can demonstrate it against someone stiff, but doing it for real is different, right? When someone's coming at you and they're going to use these skills, or even they're going to use power. Even though he uses a lot of power, he has to use his skill to break that power. Because if he doesn't, if he just relax, that power is still going to go through you, right? So power beats a lack of skill, right? Power doesn't beat higher skill, right? But higher skill still needs to be live, still needs to be used in context, right? So the structure is there. You can't deny it. It's just what it is. Otherwise, we're not doing anything. We're not even in the same room. You have to do structure, right? Structure can be static. It can be dynamic. It can be energetic. So there's different levels of structure, right? So if I push towards him and he's just stiff, this is a structure, but it's static. So this stiff structure can eventually be overcome. If I'm weak, his structure will still be okay, right? Dynamic means that he has to adjust it. So when I press him, he links and delinks and finds the balance and finds where the structure is, right? Energetic is when you can be out of structure, like you push me, I'm out of structure, I can still connect it. This is more energetic because I'm reading it through my own body and I'm redirecting it internally, right? And then I'm learning to sink, and then when he pushes, I'm expanding into him, right? So you can be out of structure and still control someone, right? This is basically the high level of any martial art. When it appears that you're doing something wrong, they still can't defend it. Or you're doing something that they know what you're doing, but they still can't defend it. So there's many, many layers.